I never thought a simple knock at the door could change how I saw my neighborhood or the people in it. It was a Saturday morning, crisp and sunny, birds chirping outside the window like nothing could go wrong. I was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes and humming along to the radio when the knock came. Sharp, rapid, aggressive, not a neighborly knock. No, this knock had intent behind it. I wiped my hands and walked to the front door, already feeling my stomach tighten. And when I opened it, there she was. Karen. No, not just a Karen. The Karen of our HOA. Hair perfectly sprayed into submission. Sunglasses that practically screamed, "I see myself as law enforcement." And a clipboard clutched like it held the keys to the entire neighborhood. "Good morning," she said in that cold, clipped tone. "We need to talk about your daughter." My heart skipped. What about my daughter? She tilted her head, eyes narrowing. She blatantly ignored me this morning when I tried to speak with her at the mailbox. 3 times I addressed her. She looked directly at me and just walked off. Now here's the thing. My daughter, Emily, is deaf. She was born that way. And while she's incredibly bright, perceptive, and fiercely independent, she doesn't always catch on to when someone is trying to speak if they aren't directly in her line of sight, or their lips are covered or obscured. Karen had spoken behind her. She never stood a chance. I blinked, unsure of how to respond. Karen was fuming like Emily had committed some personal betrayal. She ignored me. "You people think you're above the HOA rules." "You mean Emily?" I asked carefully. "Who else?" Karen snapped. "That's a violation of Article 4, subsection B. Residents must acknowledge and cooperate with HOA representatives at all times." I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. Instead, I calmly said, "Karen, Emily's deaf." What happened next, I'll never forget. Her nostrils flared. She didn't back off. She didn't apologize. She scoffed. "Convenient excuse," she muttered, arms crossed. She looked right at me. She chose to ignore me. I won't be disrespected in my own community. That was when I realized she didn't believe me. It wasn't about a misunderstanding. This wasn't someone making a mistake. Karen had decided what kind of girl Emily was, and no amount of truth could convince her otherwise. I closed the door, heart pounding. But that wasn't the end of it. Not by far. Because that afternoon, something far worse happened, and it involved Emily, Karen, and a confrontation that would end with police lights on our quiet suburban street. But I'll get to that. Because to understand how it all escalated so quickly, you need to know what happened in the hours that followed. The rest of that morning moved with an uneasy quiet, like the stillness before a thunderstorm. Emily, unaware of what just happened, was upstairs in her room, working on a sewing project she had taken up recently, hand-stitching little animal plushies for kids at the local hospital. The house was peaceful, but in my chest, the pressure was mounting. I couldn't shake Karen's words. The way she dismissed Emily's deafness like it was an excuse. The way her voice carried a threat wrapped in HOA authority. And worst of all, that I knew this wasn't over. By 2 p.m., I got a text from my neighbor Linda, one of the few people on the block who actually liked us. It was a short message, but it chilled me. Karen's marching around again. She doesn't look happy. Be careful. I stood by the window and watched. There she was, clipboard in hand, storming from yard to yard like she was inspecting military barracks. Her lips were pursed, her gait stiff, and I could tell she was working herself into something. Her path was erratic but deliberate. My house was the center of her orbit. Then it happened. I heard the front door open. I hadn't even realized Emily had come downstairs. She was heading out to walk our dog, Rocky. She had her leash in one hand, her phone in the other, scrolling through messages in her deaf community group chat, and Rocky trotted along happily, tail wagging. It should have been an ordinary moment, but then Karen intercepted her. From my window, I watched as Karen practically leapt into Emily's path, arms flailing, mouth moving fast. Emily stopped, startled, but only for a second. She didn't catch what Karen was saying. She couldn't. She probably thought it was someone asking for directions or talking to Rocky. She gave a polite, uncertain nod, then continued walking. And that was the trigger. Karen's entire posture changed. She stepped forward again, this time blocking Emily's path entirely. Rocky barked once, sensing the tension. I could see Karen's finger wagging now, then her hand gesturing toward Emily's phone. She was yelling. I couldn't hear her, but I could see it in the tight way she held herself, the aggression in her stance. Emily frowned, confused, and held her hands up in a universal, I don't understand motion. But Karen didn't care. She snatched Emily's phone. That was when I moved. I bolted out the front door so fast, I didn't even grab my shoes. I sprinted across the yard just as Karen was waving Emily's phone in the air, accusing her of recording her without permission, a claim as wild as it was false. Emily was on the verge of tears, Rocky barking loudly now, and Karen? She was red-faced, finger-pointing, and making a scene in broad daylight, like she was performing for an audience. I shoved myself between them. She's deaf, Karen. What the hell do you think you're doing? Karen turned on me like I had insulted royalty. She ignored me again, then tried to record me. That's harassment. She's threatening an HOA officer. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You stole her phone. You cornered a disabled teenager. This is harassment, Karen. She didn't budge. I have authority here. She's not exempt from rules just because she hesitated, then sneered. Special. That word. Something in me snapped. But before I could respond, Linda appeared with her phone held high, already recording. Behind her, two other neighbors had come outside, drawn by the noise. One of them, a retired police officer, was already dialing 911. Karen didn't know it yet, but the tide was turning, and fast. When the police arrived just minutes later, the entire street was watching. But what really sealed Karen's fate was Emily's body cam. Yes, Emily's body cam. I had insisted on it after a minor incident at school months ago. Something just to keep her safe in a world that doesn't always understand. It ran discreetly on a pin clipped to her shirt. Everything had been recorded, and when we showed the officers the footage, Karen's yelling, her blocking the path, the phone snatch, the dismissive remarks about Emily's deafness. You could feel the shift in the air. Karen's confident smirk began to crack. You're under arrest, one officer finally said, for harassment, intimidation, and theft of personal property. Karen's jaw dropped. You're joking. But they weren't. As they placed the cuffs on her, the neighborhood watched in stunned silence. Some with phones recording, others just shocked. And Emily? She stood there quietly, one hand stroking Rocky's back, the other tucked close to her chest. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't angry. She was just tired. And this was only the beginning. The moment Karen was placed in the back of the patrol car, the street buzzed with murmurs and uncertain glances. Some neighbors crossed their arms in disbelief. Others looked relieved, like a long-standing storm had finally broken. A few even applauded quietly, but it wasn't celebration. It was recognition. Recognition that someone had finally stood up, and the system, at least for once, had responded. But inside our house, the mood was far from triumphant. Emily sat curled up on the couch, Rocky nestled tightly beside her. She was silent, her hand still trembling. The police had taken our statements, copied the footage from her body cam, and assured us the charges would move forward. One officer, a kind older man named Rodriguez, knelt to her level before leaving. You didn't do anything wrong, he signed slowly in ASL. You did everything right. Emily nodded, her eyes shimmering, but she didn't smile. I knew why. When you're deaf, the world often makes you feel like you're the problem. That somehow it's your fault for not hearing, not responding, not conforming to what others expect. Karen's outburst didn't just scare her. It validated a fear she'd always carried. That people wouldn't understand her, or worse, they wouldn't care to. Later that evening, after things quieted down, I made Emily her favorite meal, mac and cheese with extra cheese, just like she liked it. We sat at the table together, barely touching our food. Then she signed something I'll never forget. If I wasn't recording, would they have believed me? I felt a lump in my throat, because the honest answer was, maybe not. Maybe Karen would have spun her version, smeared us through HOA reports, even convinced others that Emily was just being difficult. I'd seen her do it before, to others in the neighborhood who crossed her. But this time, the truth had teeth. Over the next few days, things began to unravel around Karen. It started with the HOA president issuing a formal apology on behalf of the board. Then came the emails, one after another. Neighbors wrote to us, some apologizing for not standing up earlier, some admitting they'd been afraid of her retaliation. Even Linda, the brave neighbor who recorded part of the confrontation, confessed something quietly over coffee. She did this to the single mom 2 streets over too, and the older couple with the gnomes in their yard. She just picks people, but what she did to Emily was different. She had targeted a child, a disabled child, and thanks to the footage, the police report, and the growing public support, the media caught wind of it too. By the end of the week, a small local news station aired the story. Blurred faces, names withheld, but the message clear. An HOA board member had harassed a deaf teenager and was facing charges. Karen's arrest wasn't just about HOA politics anymore. It was about ableism, about power misused, about a girl who was ignored only because someone refused to understand. And still, Emily said almost nothing. Not because she didn't have thoughts or feelings, but because sometimes silence speaks louder than outrage, and hers was deafening. One evening, I walked into her room and found her writing something in her notebook. I asked what it was, and she handed me the page. They wanted me to hear them, but they never listened to me. It hit me like a punch to the chest. Karen had shouted, accused, threatened, but not once had she tried to understand. Not once had she stopped to ask a question. And now, the consequences of that ignorance were catching up to her. But for Emily and me, the hardest part was still ahead. Because as the legal case moved forward, Karen wasn't going down quietly. And neither was the ugly truth about how some of the HOA had enabled her for years. Just when we thought things were finally turning around, the air changed again, thick, oppressive, and charged with tension. Karen may have been arrested, but she wasn't defeated. And worse, we were beginning to realize she hadn't been acting alone. It started with a letter slipped into our mailbox. No envelope, no return address, just a single sheet of printer paper with bold black letters. This is what happens when you bring attention you don't deserve. Keep your head down. Emily found it before I did. She didn't need to hear the words to know what they meant. Her fingers trembled as she handed it to me, eyes wide with that same wounded look she wore the day Karen yelled at her. I took the paper, heart thudding, and folded it slowly, trying to stay calm. But inside, I was boiling. I called the police again. They added it to the ongoing case, logged as evidence, and warned me to be cautious. But that wasn't all. Over the next few days, other things started happening. Quiet things. Our trash cans were accidentally knocked over. Someone reported us for unapproved renovations because we painted our mailbox post a brighter shade of blue. HOA notices began arriving almost daily, and all of it, every bit, had Karen's fingerprints, or at least the fingerprints of those she left behind, because with her removed from her position, we expected the HOA to start cleaning house. Instead, we found out just how deep her influence ran. She had allies, people who had turned a blind eye to her bullying for years because she kept the neighborhood in order, and now they were trying to do her dirty work for her. Emily retreated further. She stopped walking Rocky alone. She kept her curtains drawn. She even turned off the notifications in her deaf community app because the constant buzz was too much. It wasn't just fear, it was exhaustion. The kind that seeps into your bones when you've been forced to justify your existence, again and again. I wasn't going to let them win. I couldn't. So I started digging. I went to HOA meetings, not just attending, but recording, documenting, scrutinizing. I spoke to every neighbor Karen had ever harassed. I started a small group chat with them. We called ourselves the Watchers. We weren't out for revenge. We were out for truth. And the truth was worse than I imagined. Karen had falsified reports, filed fake violations, even manipulated votes during board decisions. She used fear, whispers of fines, threats of property liens, suggestions that this neighborhood isn't for people like you. She'd weaponized her authority. One elderly couple, the Donovans, broke down in tears telling me their story. Karen had fined them for their ramp, installed for Mr. Donovan's wheelchair, saying it violated the aesthetic continuity. Another neighbor, a single mother named Rena, had been slapped with violation after violation for her son's excessive noise, which turned out to be him laughing in the yard. It all painted a picture, not just of Karen, but of an HOA rotted from the inside out, where her power had been protected by silence and fear. Until now, with enough testimonies, I reached out to a local attorney specializing in community rights. She reviewed everything, the reports, the letters, the video footage, even Emily's silent, heartbreaking note. She agreed we had a case, not just against Karen, but against the HOA board that had enabled her. We were going to expose them. But then the knock came, late one evening, just as I was preparing documents to send to the attorney. There was a knock at the door, not frantic, not hurried, deliberate. I opened it to find a man I didn't recognize, tall, square-shouldered, in a cheap suit. He didn't introduce himself. He simply said, "You're stirring up things that don't need stirring. Drop it, for your daughter's sake." And then he walked away, just like that, into a black SUV with no plates. It was no longer just about HOA politics. It was about something deeper, something darker. But they had made one critical mistake. They thought threatening my daughter would make me back down. They had no idea what kind of parent they were dealing with. The door clicked shut behind me, but the chill from that man's words clung to the walls of our home. I stood there, staring at the wood grain like it might offer me answers. Drop it, for your daughter's sake. That wasn't a warning. It was a veiled threat. A threat aimed at the one person in this world I would burn everything down to protect. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, every light in the house on. I kept checking the cameras I'd installed after Karen's arrest. I went over the video again, zooming in on the SUV's license plate. Nothing. They'd thought of everything, but they didn't think I would dig deeper. By morning, I had already contacted the attorney again and forwarded the incident. She urged me to file a police report. "This is escalation," she said, "and it needs to be documented." I filed it, all right, and then I did something more. I wrote it down, every detail. The time, his voice, the smell of cheap cologne. I wasn't going to forget. I couldn't afford to. Emily didn't know about the threat. I didn't tell her. Not yet. I wanted to shield her, give her a chance to breathe before dragging her into another nightmare. But she could sense it. She had that intuitive silence kids develop when they've lived through enough tension. She started following me around the house with her eyes, like she was watching for something, waiting. Meanwhile, the pressure built. The HOA sent us an official warning, claiming we were disrupting neighborhood peace. They accused me of spreading misinformation and rallying neighbors under false pretenses. The irony made me want to laugh, but there was nothing funny about it, because I knew this wasn't just about shutting me up. It was about protecting themselves. That week, I started attending HOA meetings with a recorder in my pocket and a folder under my arm. I sat in the front row, eyes locked with each board member, daring them to speak. And when the meeting opened for public comment, I stood. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I told the truth. I read out the violations issued to Emily. I detailed Karen's harassment. I showed them the police report. I brought statements from the Donovans, from Rena, from others like us. I laid bare the rot, in calm, measured words. You could hear a pin drop. When I was done, one of the board members, an older man named Davis, asked quietly, "What do you want?" I looked him dead in the eye. I want Karen held accountable. I want this board to open a formal investigation into her conduct. I want every violation she issued reviewed. And I want a public apology to every resident she bullied into silence. Silence. Then someone clapped. Just one. But then another joined. Then another. It wasn't thunderous. It was cautious. But it was real. That night, our group, the Watchers, doubled in size. The attorney filed formal complaints with the state HOA regulatory office. Local news ran a follow-up on Karen's arrest, this time including anonymous quotes from several neighbors describing systematic harassment. Our case wasn't just gaining traction, it was gaining momentum. But with momentum comes resistance. The very next day, I found our backyard gate wide open. Rocky was gone. Emily sobbed like I've never seen her sob before. She ran from room to room, signing "Where's Rocky?" over and over until her hands trembled too much to continue. We searched the entire neighborhood, posted flyers, called animal control. I filed a police report, of course, but we knew this wasn't a coincidence. This was a message. Only this time, they didn't break us. They forged us. Because the next morning, Rocky was returned muddy, shaken, but alive, tied to our front porch with a note around his neck. "This is your last warning." I stared at that note, heart pounding. They thought fear would make me stop. They didn't realize they had just handed me more evidence. And now I wasn't just fighting for justice. I was fighting to bring the entire system crashing down. By now, our home no longer felt like a sanctuary. Every creak of the floorboard, every flicker of light outside the window set my nerves on edge. Emily, once so bright and full of silent laughter, had grown quieter than ever. She slept curled up with Rocky every night, arms around him like he was her only anchor to normalcy. In some ways, he was... That dog had become her lifeline, and mine too. But fear wasn't the only thing living in our house anymore. There was something else taking root now. Resolve. I spent every evening compiling a timeline, connecting dots, and building a case so solid it would shame a courthouse. With the attorney's help, we now had a binder 2 inches thick filled with evidence, violations issued disproportionately to single parents, disabled residents, and minorities. Photos of fences that had been mysteriously damaged only days after neighbors filed complaints. Copies of emails between board members where they joked about keeping the neighborhood clean. Code words for something far uglier. And then a breakthrough. Davis, the board member who'd first asked what I wanted, called me. He'd seen enough. He said he couldn't keep sitting silently while the rest of the board ignored what was becoming a legal liability. He was willing to talk, willing to leak internal meeting minutes. He told me one thing that chilled me. Karen had never acted alone. Her position had been secured by a network. People who owed her favors, who'd quietly voted with her or looked the other way when she wielded the rule book like a weapon. But she'd gone too far this time. The arrest had cracked the dam. And with my case gaining traction, more people had begun speaking up. Stories poured in. Families threatened with eviction over imaginary violations. Elderly couples fined into submission. Even a disabled veteran whose service dog had been targeted by anonymous complaints. I knew now. I wasn't just fighting for Emily. I was fighting for all of them. Then came the invitation. The HOA, under public pressure, was hosting a community forum to address recent concerns. Their words, not mine. I knew it was a PR stunt, meant to calm the waters and convince everyone the board was listening. But I also knew what it really was, an opportunity. I showed up early, binder in hand, with several members of the Watchers behind me. Emily stayed home with a friend, and I promised her I'd come back with something better. The meeting hall was full. Neighbors who'd never attended before were suddenly packed shoulder to shoulder. Whispers filled the air. The board looked tense but practiced. A slick new spokesperson introduced the session, all fake warmth and corporate phrases. When they opened the floor for comments, I didn't raise my hand. I stood up and walked to front. "I don't need permission to speak," I said clearly. Because my daughter didn't get permission before she was screamed at by your former president, threatened by one of her associates, and then targeted again and again because she didn't react the way you expected her to. Gasps rippled through the room. I didn't stop. She's deaf. She didn't ignore Karen. She didn't hear her. But that didn't matter, did it? Because Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was picking victims. And you, this board, you let her. I placed a binder on the table in front of them. Every complaint, every violation, every act of intimidation is in here, witnessed, recorded, and ready to be reviewed by our attorney, and, if necessary, the press. Silence. Then applause. Not polite, not cautious, loud. Some neighbors stood. Others shout about time, or enough is enough. The board looked stunned, cornered, and in that moment, they blinked. The spokesperson fumbled for words, trying to calm the room, but it was no use. Davis stood up, too. I move that we suspend all pending HOA violations issued under Karen's leadership, effective immediately, he said. Another board member hesitated and then nodded. Motion passed. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. Not yet, because the fight wasn't over. But the walls of their little fortress, they were finally starting to crumble. The days following the community forum felt different, lighter, as if the whole neighborhood had been holding its breath and could finally exhale. I could feel in the air when I walked Rocky. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now waved, or even crossed the street just to talk. One woman, tears in her eyes, told me, "We were afraid. You gave us our voices back." I corrected her gently. I didn't do this alone. We all stood up, together. But I hadn't forgotten, and I hadn't forgiven. Karen's influence was gone, but the damage she'd done still lingered. Some residents still bore the financial scars of her fines. Others were left with anxiety and emotional trauma that couldn't be erased with policy changes. And then there was Emily, my beautiful, brave daughter, who had flinched every time the doorbell rang for weeks. I made a choice. We filed a civil lawsuit, not just against Karen, but against the HOA itself. Our attorney said we had grounds: discrimination against a disabled minor, emotional distress, and pattern-based harassment. The evidence we'd gathered wasn't just damning, it was overwhelming. Karen's arrest had been the fuse, but the lawsuit was an explosion. The media picked it up again. This time it wasn't a blip, it was a headline. Mother of deaf child sues HOA after alleged harassment and threats, demands accountability for years of abuse. Karen, no longer protected by her position, tried to stay hidden, but she was subpoenaed. So were 3 board members. Davis, who had since resigned from the board in protest, agreed to testify on our behalf. The hearing was scheduled for 3 months out, but before it ever reached the courtroom, the HOA settled. The terms were private, but I'll say this: they didn't just pay us. They apologized, publicly, in a written statement mailed to every resident. They admitted serious failures in leadership and enforcement, and vowed to reform internal policies, retrain board members, and include a disability advocate on every future HOA council. But what mattered most happened quietly, at home. One evening, Emily sat with me on the porch, sketching with charcoal. Rocky napped beside her, snoring softly. She looked up at me, her hands moving with careful purpose and sign. "It's quieter now," she signed. I smiled. "Quieter is good." She nodded, then added, "But not scared quiet. Just peaceful." It hit me then like a wave. All this time, I'd been trying to protect her from the world. But maybe, just maybe, she was stronger than the world ever gave her credit for. Stronger than I'd realized, too. Karen thought Emily was invisible, a target, a mistake. But Emily was the reason the community stood up, the reason the system cracked and crumbled, the reason silence turned into justice. And now silence didn't mean fear. It meant peace and power. Because the loudest justice of all isn't the one shouted in anger. It's the one earned in quiet, patient strength. The kind of strength only someone like Emily could teach us.